What's going on? It's Justeeni here. Alright, so this video is going to be something completely different. I'm going to be ranting about tribe balance in this game because it's something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, honestly. I guess we'll just kind of jump right into it. This is going to be completely unscripted, totally disorganized, yada yada. So first, let's look at this funny tier list that I made. This is kind of a little bit, just a little bit exaggerated. If I were to make it less exaggerated, it would look something like this. But yeah, tribe balance in this game kind of sucks. Well, you could argue oh, very diverse meta. Half the tribes in the game are pretty relevant, but then half of them aren't, which is kind of sad. But the thing is the balance has kind of been like this for a while with mainly these tribes in the bottom not getting their time to shine. And things have been pretty wacky. And the main thing is we're mostly going to focus on the normal tribes, because if we think about it, the special tribes can really go anywhere. For example, Aquarion, in its history, it started out pretty niche, and then with the Path of the Ocean update, it ended up being pretty solid. And then now post-rework, I think post-rework brought it back down the niche, but then the balance of the rework shot it straight up to just being flat out disgusting. I'll talk about that in a separate video probably. But yeah, the special tribes are very malleable with balance, so we won't really focus on them too much. They can easily just be put wherever, maybe something like this, I don't know. In a perfect world. Who knows, maybe. But here's the thing, is we've got these tribes here, which are known as turn 0 tribes, and they've always been known as turn 0 tribes, and they've always been known as extremely meta. They've always been the best. Either just flat out the best, or they're competing with special tribes. And there's really been not much of an in-between. And I say not much of an in-between because there's been a couple of instances, cough cough, Luxador and Yadek, where they've actually managed to kind of get close to balance. But the problem is it's not been in good ways. For example, if we go way back, pre-first balance patch ever, things kind of looked a little this in the top tiers. I've got this tier list just to explain this. Yeah. Luxador was the tribe of all time, and yeah. But then you also had stuff like this, which was kind of funny. Hoodrick was actually really good, because back then Chop and Force and Lumber Huts were both 2 stars. And Rhodes were 2 stars. But we'll kind of get into that. So because I do want to talk about how you can balance these tribes, because right now there's only 2 variables that you can actually use to balance the normal tribes, except for Luxador, where I guess you've got a little more flexibility. But for the most part, for all the other ones, you really just have 2 ways of balancing them. You either change the tech that they have to work with, or you change their terrain. The issue is both of those are extremely limiting in terms of balance, which is why the turn 0 tribes have always remained stronger. The turn 0 tribes have always remained weaker. It's just there's not enough ways to balance. For example, when Rhodes were 2 stars, yes, Yadek was a great tribe, but Rhodes also became really, really meta relevant. It really defined so many things. Especially for it kind of messed up the special tribes a lot. Any tribe that didn't have access to Rhodes or didn't have easy access to Rhodes really got hit hard by the fact that Rhodes were 2 stars. Simanti, for example, bringing Rhodes to 3 stars actually single-handedly made them a lot more meta. And I'm sure current Aquarion would be way less scary with 2-star Rhodes as well. It impacts a lot of things. And also, I think, personally, I prefer 3-star Rhodes, again, just because it makes it less over-centralizing. It made Rhodes kind of a shortcut for economy, too. Basically, what I'm trying to say is Rhodes were, really overpowered at 2 stars. It was, not even funny. They were really ridiculous, and it kind of threw off the balance of the game. So, even though it fixed Yadek just fine, balance-wise, it wasn't really good for the game. And that's kind of the problem with balancing with tech. Just make the tech that they start with so strong that it just makes the tribe like really good and matching the turn zero. The problem is you just kind of ruin the game when you do that, and it makes things unfun. And kind of like a similar thing with like forestry, for example. Like before lumber huts were nerfed, Hoodwick was in a pretty good place overall. Problem was, the second problem with changing the text is barter actually got more use out of like the really good lumber hut. So like barter became really good. And I'd say like Empress to an extent, but I like just having barter in their own tier here. It's funny. Yeah, barter can make tons of use of these huts as well. So like when you change like a tech that like a tribe uses, the problem is like the turn zeros can often just take advantage of that tech as well. If you want to make like farming better so then Omaji's good, oops, now Zabasi's overpowered. And that's a pretty big issue. It makes it really hard to like get the turn zeros close to the same viability as non-turn zeros. Because like if you nerf a technology, like for example, when lumber huts were nerfed, when it was like this, you bring barter down, but then you throw Hoodwick straight back in the dumpster. So like that's kind of the problem with like balancing the text, right? And then like with terrain balancing, I remember barter had like some terrain balancing. They used to have like way more animals in forests, which in moderation, it is okay to like change and nerf the terrain. I'd say most of the tribes, their terrain is like perfectly fine. Because a big thing with like the terrain is it's not going to affect their balance a ton, but it is going to affect how they play a good amount, and it gives them a good amount of identity. Like, for example, Venger. Like, if Venger had good terrain, they would easily be, like, a step above Chinchi for sure, because their tech is just better. The only reason why they're bad is their terrain is bad. The problem is, like, if you give Venger good terrain, then is it really Venger? Like, a big, like, shtick of Venger is, like, you get bad terrain, but you get the funny swords. So, like, yeah, you fix Venger's viability, but you kind of, like, ruin the identity of the tribe in the process. And, like, when you buff, like, a lot of these tribes, like, the secret to making any tribe terrain good is just give them a ton of forests and animals, like Hoodwick, and then just, like, if they have a better starting tech than archery, then they're magically a good tribe. But, like, that's extremely mundane and lame and really boring, to be honest. It'll make every tribe kind of share a similar identity and be really repetitive. Like, we already have tribes with somewhat similar terrain, like Hoodwick and Barter, and like their playstyles are pretty similar already. There's a lot of overlap, and if you kind of like make all these non-turn zero tribes just have really good terrain, you'll notice a lot of overlap with it, because they're going to invest into similar game plans. Even though they start with different techs, they're going to eventually like converge, because like again, like the terrain affects the playstyle quite a bit. But what about like nerfing the turn zero's terrain, right? You could make their terrain like Venger level, right? And that would fix their balance, right? And you could maybe even do it in a way that still keeps their playstyle. Like maybe you just give Barter absolutely no fruit while still giving them like a mediocre forest rate, and then they get bumped down to here, which like sure, you can bump them down to here, but the problem is nobody's going to want to play Barter, because it's like half of your spawns are just going to be absolutely garbage, basically, because you just won't get resources, and that's no fun. Like, people want to play the game. Like, that's also why, like, not a lot of people like Vengers, because, like, you know, oftentimes it's difficult to do things. It also just makes the tribe a lot more luck dependent in general. Like, sometimes you have to invest in, like, 3 or 4 techs versus only, like, 2 or something. It just creates a lot of unfun scenarios when you like make a tribe terrain absolute garbage. So it's not an ideal route of balance either. And those are the only ways to balance these tribes. So basically, you change the technology either that they start with or something that they go into often, which we've seen before. Like, it can help a tribe, but then it can also have unintended effects, or it can like throw off the balance of the game. Stuff like that, because I'd say the current like balance of like technologies, I'll definitely make a rant video about it, but I'd say it's actually probably in the best state it's ever been. It's not like perfect, but it's honestly pretty good. Like, it's been improving over time, and like I don't want things to like change too much with that, because it like if you bring back like 2-star roads and suddenly just roads are that much more over centralizing. And it's not that great in my opinion. But what do we do about this then? So my solution, me personally, I think there needs to be another variable involved. I think there's no other way to do it. And well, what else can you do? Well, what about starting stars? Every tribe currently starts with 5 starting stars. But not every tribe really can use those stars in the same way, right? Like, the thing that makes turn 0 so good is even though they start with the same amount of stars as a non-turn 0, they can use those stars to cascade like crazy. And it's as if they started with like 10 stars or something like that. Not really 10 stars, but it's as if they like just had an extra amount of stars at the beginning because they're just able to invest it into an immediate return and just go out of control with that. So like, what if you could change the starting stars of tribes? Like, what if Hodrick, for example, started with 7 stars and maybe Barter started with 4? So like, Barter can still like level up on turn 0, but now Hodrick can consider leveling up on turn 1, and then maybe that actually makes them like decent. And maybe like getting rid of that 1 star for Barter actually makes them not quite as good. I don't think it would actually affect their openings too much, but who knows. And you could even do that with some other tribes, like give Chinchi like 7 starting stars. I know Yadek actually, I did some fun math earlier. Yadek with 6 stars, like 6 starting stars, is actually pretty good. Because you can get Org pre-capture with your second city. So like stuff like that, and like you can even do that with like Kiku and like Empress, and then like before you know it, like you can actually get things like somewhat balanced. I think it would be funny if Venger was still bad. Not because I hate Venger, I just think I like having a tribe that is in the bottom tier, because it's like a funny meme tribe, right? I don't know what you do about Zabasi though. You could like nerf their terrain to the ground, or you could like do something interesting, because here's the thing with having an extra variable to balance. You could do something like buff farming or construction, but to prevent Zabasi from just being actually stupid, you nerf Zabasi's starting stars to something like 4 or even like 3. So like it's a way of kind of like counterbalancing them a little bit. Like if you bring them to 3 starting stars, they might get hurt a lot, but then if you buff their terrain back, then boom, everything's fine and dandy. Now, obviously this balance isn't perfect. Like, it's not like, oh, every tribe's like in the same exact tier, but like this is a lot better than this, right? Like, this doesn't seem ideal. This is a good step in the right direction. It at least brings everything closer. And like, sure, like Luxor, for example, like might not be like super meta, like super relevant tribe that you'll see all the time, but like if they're at least usable, I think that's honestly fine enough. Like if they have their use case, they're good enough to be used somewhere, I think that's fine. Like if balance can get here, I'm happy at this point. It doesn't need to be perfect, but honestly, more needs to be done than just having like terrain or like changing text, because it's definitely not enough. Like we've seen like the history of the game, all the balancing, it's just not enough. I think if not like starting stars, I can't really think of like another way to balance the tribes, honestly. I think starting stars is like really the only thing you can really use as an approach. I think it's a very malleable option, though it does have its own limitations. Like for example, with like starting stars, you couldn't like, for example, I mean like you could, but you shouldn't do something like giving Chinchi 9 starting stars, which would then make them a turn 0. Because then you kind of run into the issue where they start to play like the other tribes. Although if their terrain isn't too similar, then that's not an issue. But if you have something like a tribe that does have pretty similar terrain, like for example, like Quetzali and Empress, they have pretty similar terrain. If you give Quetzali too many starting stars to the point where they can play similar openings to Empress, then you'll start to have some problems of like they basically feel like the same tribe. It's just this tribe also has strategy. And yeah, but you still have a lot to work with, like lots of stuff you can do. And you can even do some like really interesting stuff. Like for example, like with IMO, like meditation's a pretty weak tech, but it's really good for IMO. Maybe you could do something like buff meditation significantly so it's actually worth buying, but then, I don't know, you make like Altar of Peace only 4 turns instead of 5, something like that, because like that would be a huge buff to IMO, but like it would make meditation like actually usable maybe, or some other buff. I don't know. I see like a lot of meditation buffs, and like the question is always like, oh, does it make IMO too strong? But like if there's more variables to adjust for IMO, which currently there aren't, IMO terrain's already pretty mediocre, so like it's almost like their tech has to be bad. But if you could like adjust their starting stars, like make meditation really, really strong, but then reduce their starting stars, and then maybe they're like here, and IMO mains can still rejoice even though their tribe got nerfed in some ways because it got buffed in other ways. Like, I don't know. Point is, there needs to be like another way to actually like balance these tribes, because right now like the tools that there are to balance them are like really, really lacking, and it's been a pretty big problem in the game for quite a while now. And even when I'd say like the balance of the game is arguably in one of the best states it's been, it's still like just it like again, like look at this. Like I really don't even think this is much of an exaggeration. Like I made this exaggerated to kind of like prove my point, you know, like, but it really actually isn't that much of an exaggeration. Like there's a pretty big gap between the strongest non-turn 0 and the weakest turn 0. Yeah, rant over something I've been yapping for a while. Like and sub, and have a good one.